Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
And they're off.
Brought to you by Go Racing. Plan your day at the races at goracing.ie.
Yeah, very good afternoon or evening to you wherever you're consuming this. You're very welcome along to Friday Night Racing. We're live on Newstock. We're obviously live on all of Off the Ball social platforms for you as well, on YouTube, Twitter and on Facebook. And Johnny Ward is here. How are you, Johnny?
Very well.
So we're going to focus on the week's racing, the weekend racing, because this is kind of, you were saying, the proper kickstart of the National Hunt season.
It's a brilliant weekend with Naas and Navan, two of my favourite tracks, and the likes of Footpad and Applejade coming back. And even though the ground is still quicker than it should be for this time of year, it's obviously safe enough for these horses to come back. And the bit of rain this week, it's a bit of a pain for, you know, us urbanites, but it's badly needed, really, really badly needed. And jumps trainers are crying out for rain, and the cards at Navan and Naas are top notch. It really just feels like the start of the jump season. You
mentioned the trainers are crying out for it. We've got one of the best trainers in the country, Gordon Elliot, on the line. Gordon, good afternoon to you. How you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, look, we're very excited about this. Johnny's been talking about these cars all week to us, and we're going to preview the races in a couple of minutes' time. But just how important was that rain that he was talking about from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. We're all crying out for a bit of rain. We're down Tipperary School horses here, and it's been spilling rain all morning. So it's very important the rain that is falling.
How badly has it inconvenienced you in terms of your gallops, the drought that we've had?
I know the gallops have been okay. We can manage the gallops, but the problem is we just can't get in grass. But listen, everyone's in the same position, and it's going to be a long season. Yeah,
and in terms of, like, would your horse be a little bit slower to come out, we'll say, in terms of galloping on grass than they would normally be, or?
They would. I'd say, to be fair, we're probably sort of 2 or 3 weeks behind ourselves at the moment, but listen, it's a long time to next March.
This weekend is obviously excellent. Just before we get on to it, you were probably happy enough in hindsight with Sam Crow, were you? Just listening to you afterwards, it was kind of like onwards and upwards with his run at Down Royal.
Listen, you're always disappointed when they don't win, but I'm very happy with the horse coming out of the race well. He's lost a good bit of weight, he's tightened up well, so we're looking to the future. You know, we keep looking forward, not look back. I would have loads to win, but he's definitely going to be okay.
In terms of next weekend, then, where will he be compared to that Down Royal, do you think?
He's definitely come on from the run, so he's in good form. We're happy with him.
Yeah, you're kind of happy to step him up now to a better race, thinking that maybe he'll kind of show more like what he showed maybe last season with the benefit of the run behind him.
Exactly.
Yeah. The weekend ahead, though, I don't know, Applejade. I was talking to David Jennings this morning in the Racing Post, and he was saying that, having spoken to you for a stable tour, of all your kind of star horses, you were particularly happy with her, and she reappears obviously at Navan on Sunday.
Yeah, she runs on Sunday. She's in good form, but again, like all mine, she's going to come onto a run, but with a few little issues at the end of last season, I think we've ironed out now, and we're looking forward to getting her started off.
Were you disappointed with the way the season ended with a couple of defeats?
Of course, we're disappointed. She got better in Cheltenham and punches out, but she doesn't have to improve a whole lot to be winning. If she improves a couple of lengths at all, she's good enough, so we're looking forward to getting her back on.
Yeah, and in fairness to her, she's been so mare for you. Like, start off with winning this last season, went on a bit of a roll then.
Unbelievable. She thinks she's 6 or 7 grade 1 altogether, so you know, she's a bit of a collector's item now at this stage.
Very excited as well to see Felix Deji running at Navan, and I suppose, was he quite hard on himself as a bumper horse?
He was, but settled a lot better over hurdles, so we're looking forward to getting him back out now on Sunday in Navan. You know, he settled great for Jack last day, jumped very well, so looking forward to the weekend. He's
a horse, Keith Dunn, who was talking at a preview night. He's an awful high time for this horse. Could he be potentially exciting?
I'd say he's definitely a grade horse, but he's a grade 1 horse, not time will tell, but he's a horse to think about.
Yeah, and a couple of other interesting runners. Campiador must be one of the most unlucky horses in training, making his chase debut on Sunday. Yeah,
lucky. He fell a couple of times and he looked like he was going to be banged there, but we're looking forward to getting him started off the weekend again, so we'll see how he goes.
What sort of jumper is he?
Touchwood, he's been jumping well at home. Keith Dunn, who's done a lot of schooling with him, so we're looking forward to starting him off.
And Dortmund Park as well. He's obviously second season hurdler now. Did you think about going chasing with him? He runs on Sunday.
He's only 5. We're going to keep him hurdling this year, but he's a big raw horse. He has to improve a lot over hurdles, but he's a chaser down the road. We might keep him hurdles this year just to mind him.
Yeah, and I suppose the racing in general at the weekend, it's quite exciting because you just see the likes of Footpad coming back, the likes of Applejade, and you've all these proper good horses coming back at 2 proper national hunt tracks.
Yeah, every weekend now there's going to be good horses out. It's great, you know, it's great to be involved in the whole thing.
What's your jockey situation now for the season ahead?
Sorry?
What's your jockey situation now for the season ahead? Who will you be using?
I'm very lucky that, you know, I've obviously got Jack and Davy Russell riding for us. with a number of other jockeys as well. So there's no shortage of good jockeys there. So we're very happy with the situation we're in.
What other horses can we expect to see in the next couple of weeks?
Listen, if I start naming them out, I'm going to forget something. With 50 horses down in Tipperary Gallop today, 50. And they're all going to start off the next couple of weeks. So we've got a lovely bunch of horses, and we just need more rain.
Have to ask you before you go about Malone Road. He won the bumper at Down Royal. I was up there on Saturday. I thought it was an astonishing turn of foot. And have you any plans for him? How good might he be?
He looks good. He doesn't do anything fancy at home. He's the type of horse you like. But he'd probably go for a winner's bumper there over Christmas summer.
Yeah, and he's a horse that is he going to make a nice chaser in time, do you think?
Definitely, yeah. He won a point and that, so he's a horse for the future again. Like most of the horses we have, the big horse for the future.
And before you go, anything for our listeners worth a couple of bob the weekend?
What have I got over the weekend? I've actually 2 nice bumper horses running on Saturday and Sunday, so hopefully both of them run well.
Their names, you know?
Daylight Kate and Commander Fleet.
Thanks a million, Gordon, for your time.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thanks,
bye.
Gordon. Obviously, working the gallops in Tipperary.
It's mad, like 50 horses schooling in Tipperary, and I know Thurles has been in the news lately because they've had to, I think they had to call off 2 meetings. Like Thurles was the all-weather track in Ireland before, the all-weather track on grass like in Ireland, because they never called off a meeting at Thurles, you know. I don't know what it is about the land in Thurles, but it's obviously very...
trains very well. There's lots of limestone. What do you mean? Of course, we know what it is now because we have Willie McCreary explain that to us last week.
Well, yeah, a lot of people have spoken about Willie's talking about the grass, actually. It's always interesting to hear something different on the show, but they had to call off 2 meetings because it was too dry. But Thurles is another track where they really bring loads of horses in for schooling, and it's another kind of way for them to generate revenue for the track. But it just shows you the size of Gordon's operation. We'll get him in someday, 50 horses, that's like 10 times a yard for a lot of trainers out there, and he's just schooling today, and he was very gracious to take a call for us, kind of I suppose a little bit unexpected, and to talk about the weekend ahead.
Yeah, totally. Sandy Shaw, the senior handicapper, is going to join us in a couple of minutes time. If you want to pass the lads his number, that'd be great.
Absolutely, yeah, that can be done. And Sandy, of course, is a father of Gary Shaw, who's just moved from St. Patrick's to St. Patrick's from Shamrock Rovers, so he's a big League of Ireland interest as well, which is always good.
These crossover sports, it's been a theme so far of this. We've had soccer players. This is the first League of Ireland crossover we've had properly. Well, you obviously. Yeah,
well, yeah, we're paranoid in racing that a lot of people, a lot of people in racing don't really seem to have an awful lot of outside interest, and I think that is actually vaguely true. They often get married to racing people, and they keep it all within the flock, but a lot of them actually do have interest in other stuff as well. And Sandy would have replaced Noel O'Brien. Still hard to believe Noel O'Brien is gone. He was a young man taken so tragically by cancer way before his time, and one of the most popular people in racing, who had to deal with a lot of diplomacy in terms of dealing with the British handicapper Phil Smith, who has since retired, but would be a bit of a different character to your normal handicapper. He'd be, wouldn't always be all that well received in Ireland in terms of how he handicaps horses, but Noel was very diplomatic in how he dealt with that, and how Sandy will deal with his British counterparts now will be interesting as well, because he's a lovely man as well, but he has his own ideas about how handicapping should happen.
Which you need to have, right? You need to kind of come into this job with a sense of this is what these are my intentions. This is what
I do think a handicapper is a bit like the cliched referee in that he should do his job, but not necessarily. It's like the less you hear of him, the better in a way. In the sense that if you hear about the handicapper, it's probably because someone has given out. And Phil Smith was frequently on at the races where it was the Ask the Handicapper show, where he would have a bit of banter with Matt Chapman. But his handicapping methods were so arbitrary, really, and so ad hoc that I thought he did handicapping a disservice, because he came up with figures that I thought just couldn't make any sense. And as far as I'm concerned, handicapping is very important. You handicap a horse based on what he's achieved, and to an extent what your interpretation is of what he's achieved, but not what he might be able to achieve in the future. And I think if the handicapper has a big ego, I think that's a bad thing. And I think Sandy's interest in handicapping is purely from the philosophy of doing the job properly.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you finished that in such a nice way, because he's on the line. Sandy, good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Ger. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Can I just ask a dumb question here before we get into the nuances of racing? Can you explain the point of the handicapper because one of the things we're trying to do here is to break down a little bit of the language around horse racing sometimes, and what exactly is the role of the handicapper?
Well, I actually heard Johnny say there, talk about, a good example would be Sandcross boats. We rate horses on what they've done and not on what they might do. And I suppose one of the interesting horses, Pro, we all expect he's going to go on. He possibly could win a champion hurdle and so forth. But to do that, he needs to find about £10 of improvement from last season. And a lot of people, I think, are assuming that he's already made that. Last weekend, that Down Royal showed us he still has a little bit to go. He's rated 160 with us. He'd need to get to near 170 in order to achieve that. So I'd expect him to improve for the run at Down Royal. He goes to the Mordiano hurdle, I believe, at Punchestown later on in the month, and we'll see how he gets on there.
Can I go back to two bits, right? So when you say he's got to find £10, explain that to us, will you?
Right. Do I need to explain ratings in detail? Like, I mean, ratings are basically pounds, as we call them, weight-wise. And most horses would have ratings. A horse, to qualify for a rating, first of all, would need to run in generally 3 hurdle races, for example, if we take hurdles. And then we assess the horse on the basis of those 3 runs, and we give them a handicap mark, which is a mark over hurdles would be based anywhere between 80 and, we'll say, around 170-ish. So in order to do that, we assess the 3 runs. We generally pick his best run and give him a mark based on that, which would be, just say it's 150. Then if we had a horse rated 140, that horse would get £10 off the 150 horse.
It's as simple as that.
In terms of weight, if the 150 horse had 11 stone 12, then the 140 horse would have 11 stone 2. That's the way it works. Okay,
so when you say 11 stone 12, that is the weight of the jockey and the weights that they place in the saddle.
Exactly. That is what the horse would carry, jockey plus saddle plus lead plus whatever to make up that weight, yeah.
Okay, and essentially the point of the handicap is that all horses are supposed to finish in the dead heat.
Theoretically, that's the case, all right, yeah. Like, I mean, what most people... Handicaps are very important because in this country, or in most countries, that probably 80% of horses will only ever win handicaps. They're not good enough to take on the really top horses. So their only chance in a lot of cases to win a race would be in a handicap. And I'd say 80% of horses, all they'll win will be handicaps. So it is very, very important in this country and any other country that we have handicaps to give these horses all a reasonable chance of winning a race. Some horses will never win a race, no matter what mark or what weight that they have, but it does even things up. It certainly evens things up. Theoretically, as you say, they're supposed to finish in a straight line, but we all know that doesn't happen.
We'll say the race now, we'll say in Navan. I was doing the spotlights for the Race from Post earlier, Sandy, and obviously the main chat at Navan on Sunday is the likes of Ballyosheen is running, Apple Jade is running, Quick Grabbing is taking on Felix Deji. But then the likes of yours truly will kind of rock down to the 3:15, and you'll see a handicap hurdle over 2 miles at Navan in which Charles Burns has Wonder Late, and then Gordon Elliot has Ange George Avalix, who's reappeared from other stables and comes back from a long layoff. Is this your idea of like a race where, oh God, like I don't want to be made a fool of here, but you know there's not much I can do because you're talking about potentially 1 if not 2 very well handicapped horses?
Yeah, that's the case. Look, sometimes, Johnny, what happens is you do weights. You mentioned Wonderlace there, for example. A very tricky horse to rate. We've rated him 119. He has 11.6 in the race. But possibly he's better than that. Possibly he is better than that. But we can only rate him on what he's done. We have looked at the race. We've tried to assess it. He didn't beat much in it, but he beat what he beat. He beat it very easily. So it's a bit like how long is a piece of string. How much better than the second horse is he? At the moment, yes, he's 119. Is he a very well handicapped horse? He could be, but we won't know until we see.
Your predecessor, obviously, we mentioned Noel O'Brien. His tragic passing, really, I think it's still very hard to get one's head around the fact that Noel is gone. But one of his one of his big things as a handicapper was he was a real faceless people. He always went racing. He wanted to meet the trainers, and I always found that quite intriguing, that he was very much open to persuasion in terms of if a trainer said you've been harsh on my horse here, or just to talk to people and always be available to chat at the races. Is that your philosophy as well?
Oh, very much so, very much so. And I have no problem with people if they want to give me a ring about their horse and to discuss their horse. Because, as you know, Johnny, people can tell me, I invite people at the trainers' courses, the new trainers that are looking for licenses, and they come in and we all go over, we give them a talk on all the various aspects. And when I'm speaking to them, I give them my phone number, and I say to them, look, come on to me, ring me anytime you want. If you want to discuss your horse, I'd be happy to listen to what you have to say, because you know more about the horse than me. We have, as handicappers generally, to read between the lines most of the time. You know, you can only assume certain things. But if they want to tell us more about their horse, we listen to what they have to say. And if they build up a relationship with the handicapper where we can trust them, we will very much listen to what they have to say. Naturally enough, if someone comes on to you and leads you up the garden path with a horse, you won't be very impressed if it comes out, lands a gamble and wins. But what that does, as I do say to them there, that's not going to do you any good in the long run, because the next time we speak to you, we're not going to listen to what you have to say. It's a bit like the boy that cried wolf, you know. You're not going to listen and take on board everything that they're actually saying because of what happened before. But I would be wide open to listen to people discuss their horses with me.
Were you always interested in the whole art of handicapping? Was that something that you were into from a very early stage, or is this kind of you acquire all your racing information and your racing knowledge and then go, actually, I can now begin to apply it to the art of handicapping?
Well, it was the case as well that you're going to become a professional footballer, but you decided that you weren't quite good enough, so you had to go down the racing route.
Yeah, that was kind of the way. All right, Johnny. Yeah. I love the football. All right, but no. Look, I was born into racing. My dad was a trainer. He was travelling head man to a man called Darty Prendergast, which I'm sure Johnny knows the name anyway. And my mum was involved as well in the racing industry. And my dad was a very good trainer. He trained the winner of the Irish 1000 Guineas. He trained the winner of the Ebor, a number of good races. And we were just, from the time I started school, all I wanted to do was get out and have some involvement in horses. And as it turned out, it was the stud end of things I ended up in. And it would just so happen that the advertising for the handicapping job came along at the right time. And I applied for it, got it, and I've loved it ever since. But going back, it was always going to be something to do with horses I was going to get involved in. But it just happened to be racing. I was actually more into the stud end of things up to that. But when it came up, I found it interesting. I did spend a short time in time farm over in England for a month during my summer holidays, and when I was about 17. So, I had a good idea how handicapping worked. I was very interested in it, and that's how it all happened.
Do you have a particular philosophy? And more to the point, what was your interpretation of Phil Smith's kind of manner of handicapping in Britain, which obviously incurred the anger or frustration of a lot of trainers over here? Not so much maybe because the horses have a higher mark when they go to Britain, but just because it seemed quite erratic in terms of how we handicapped horses. And we obviously had the joy that it was not the John Smith's Grand National, it was the Phil Smith's Grand National, because he had such a role in the handicapping of the horses. But obviously he's retired now. But what was your take on the way he handicapped horses, and was it a bit, I suppose, needless antagonism at the end of the day?
I think that might be a little bit harsh, Johnny. I think Phil was a very, very good handicapper. He tried to change things okay. He had some of his own philosophies. But I found him an easy man to deal with. There was, in fairness to him, there a couple of years ago, there was uproar when the weights came out for Cheltenham and the handicaps, and it turned out that we won 10 of the handicaps there.
Does that justify it though?
Well, from his point of view, it obviously would. The fact that we were able to win 10. You're probably talking more specifically about the Grand National, I think, rather than...
No, in general, I'm just... There doesn't necessarily seem to be a pattern to how he actually handicaps horses. And I think actually Campiador, who runs at the weekend, I think the mark he got initially for the Fred Winter, to me was... like, there was no logic to it whatsoever based on his juvenile form. And I looked at that and I was like, he looks at the Fred Winter market, he sees this horse well fancied, he sees connections, and he comes up with a figure. But then you look at the figure and it's like, there's no way you can legitimise that. And my problem with him was, and I never had this problem with you or Noel, was that he would come up with a figure based on things that had nothing to do with actually handicapping the horse on paper. In my view.
No. Yeah, one of the things, now you mentioned Campiador, and he's probably slightly different to most in that he was a juvenile at the time, and also we always had a differential between our juveniles. We were always maybe 6 to 7 pounds less than them with our ratings. So if he had him, we'll say 6 or 7 pounds higher than us at the time, that would have been normal enough back then. Yes, then he would probably have added on 3 or 4 more pounds, which is what they were doing at the time. But I have to say, in fairness again, that the horse ran in the race, had every chance when he fell at the last in that particular race. So it's hard to say he was wrong. But the other thing I would like to mention, and Phil has pointed this out himself, everybody talks about Phil Smith the whole time. Phil Smith did the 3 mile plus chasers. There are other handicappers there as well. There's a horse, there's a man who would do the 2 mile hurdlers. There's a man who do the 3 mile hurdlers, 2 mile chases, 2.5. So there's 5 or 6 handicappers there. And Phil was the head of handicapping, but he wasn't necessarily the man who made those actual decisions. Yes, in the Grand National he would have, but not in the likes of with the likes of Campiador and so forth. But still, look, it worked for both of us. This, in the last 2 years, I suppose you would say, we've sat down to try and sort some of these issues out. And this, at the end of last season, for the first time ever, we actually agreed figures for all the juveniles, that their figure was the same as our figure. Nearly all of our 2.5 to 3 milers and all our chasers were more or less the same, or within a pound. So we are pulling it together.
That's actually a big departure, actually, and that's something I think punters, as a particular group, would certainly warm to.
Yeah. Like we made a conscious decision at the end of this season to try and look. We know there's an issue with it, and people don't understand it. But if you notice, Johnny, both for the Grand National in England this year and for Cheltenham, the previous year there was uproar. This year there wasn't a word. There wasn't a word. And we won kind of 50-50 with the handicaps this year as well, you know. And look, the only way it was going to work was if they came down a bit. And we said, you come down a bit, we'll come up a bit. And we'll meet somewhere. It was the only way to do it. And it has worked reasonably well. The handicaps were fine. We split them more or less down the middle. The Grand National, I know there was a lot of hassle the previous year, but this time around it was all pretty good. And we were first and second, but there was no complaints.
How big is your own office now, Sandy? How many of you are actually responsible for handicapping horse racing in Ireland?
Yeah, well, there's 4 of us in Ireland. There's 2 of us do the jumps and 2 lads do the flat as well. So I'm working with a chap called Shea Quinn, who was a steward secretary prior to this, but very sharp guy, delighted to have him. And then we have Gary O'Gorman as the senior flat handicapper, and Mark Bird, who works with him. So there's 4 of us all together, 2 jumps and 2 flat.
Is it a maths job, really, when it comes down to it? Is it mostly mathematical based?
Yeah, a lot of it's probably more mathematical on the flat, if the lads don't mind me saying so. It's slightly different over jumps, because when we're working out our assessments, we have to decide, you know, how much did that mistake cost that horse, or what would have happened if this horse wasn't hampered. We've had an awful lot more flat races, we say, at Dundalk, start and finish, and there's no obstacles in the way. When you're talking about obstacles, you know, it's a matter of opinion. You mightn't always be right, and I always say that about handicapping. What we do, it's a matter of opinion, and it has to be our opinion because we're the handicappers. But it's not necessarily the right opinion. We just try to get it as best we can. To, you know, personally, I like to get a horse to within 3 or 4 pounds of a mark where he should be, and then I'd be happy. But look, sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. And
to go back to where we started, when you're saying a horse has to find £10, essentially you mean the horse needs to be rated £10 higher before he's going to be
Yeah, he needs to improve. Now, you'll find, Jared, that most horses, like the likes of a Sam Crow, he's a novice, he's inexperienced, and like a football or whatever, he's young. And over time, you would hope that he would improve and get better. A novice of his calibre, we would expect to do that. As I go back to say, when we rate the horse, we can only rate him on what he's done, not on what he might do, but there's every chance he will improve the amount he needs, which I reckon to be in or around £10 is what he needs to improve to win the likes of a champion hurdle.
And what would signify that improvement for you? Is that like the distance he beats other horses by? Is it? Yeah,
it would be. What would happen is we'll say we've a horse like Mellon, who'd be, we'll say, rated a few pounds higher than him. He'd be rated 165, right? He's rated 165. So at the moment, on what Mellon was second in the champion hurdle last year, he's rated 165, and Sam Crow was rated 160. Now, they met, of course, at the end of the season, their last season at Punchestown. Unfortunately, both of them fell.
That was remarkable as well. Sorry to interrupt, Sandy, that was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in horse racing. Two horses at the same hurdle fell independently. It was literally about 1,000,000 to 1, because you don't expect them to fall at any hurdle. You don't expect them to fall at a specific hurdle, and least of all, you don't expect them to fall independent of each other at the same hurdle, and it was like a two-horse race.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing, because there were completely different instances as such at the same hurdle, and it was from a handicapping perspective, it was a killer really, because this was a rare chance. I have to say, it doesn't happen often that the top novice meets one of the top current champion hurdle type horses, and when they both fell, it was an awful pity. It was an awful pity. So what it left us with is Mellon rated 165. Sam Crow still rated 160. So, Ger, in order for Sam Crow to beat Mellon, he may meet the horse now in the Morgian hurdle at Punchestown, and if he beats him, we'll have to look at going higher than Mellon's 165. He could turn out to be a 166 horse, but that's how we find out. If he goes and beats the established stars, horses that are rated, that will show us that he has made that improvement.
Okay. When they're both off different marks at this stage, do you have an expectation that obviously the 165 horse is supposed to beat the 160 horse? Are they supposed to win
theoretically,
by... Yeah, theoretically. And in theory, is it supposed to be by a specific distance? Does the weight equate to a distance?
It's kind of, like roughly it's a length to a pound.
A pound a length.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's deeply inexact.
Sure.
It's almost like too convenient, but in fairness, it is too convenient. And like you look at a horse like Brex Drago, we'll say running tomorrow, Sandy. He won 3 hurdle races in a row, but this is a problem for the likes of him, because Brex Drago is a horse who just doesn't have it in his mind to win by very far. He does enough, and is he one of those horses that you're kind of like, how do I actually handicap him?
Yeah, the hardest horses to handicap, or more so the hardest horses to reassess when they do win handicaps, are some horses are like that. They only do enough to win. They just like to stay in front of the lad, or they like to keep company with the horse beside them there, and they'll only do enough to win. So they might win by a length, we'll say, and theoretically we'd be raising their rating £2 more than the second horse as such. But what we might not know or might not be able to see is that he could have maybe £10 in hand. He could have won a lot more easily than the actual margin. And they're ideal horses for a trainer to have, handicap-wise anyway, that they don't show what they're really capable of. They just do enough to get home in front. And yes, they can be difficult to rate, all right, yeah.
He's also known for his son Gary being a League of Ireland starlet who was top scorer with Shamrock Rovers last season, but has now done if not the cardinal sin, like maybe a papal sin or something, by joining St Patrick's Athletic. But I obviously I probably, when I meet you at the race, I'd say 95% of the time I'm talking to you about the League of Ireland. But you've obviously taken great pride in Gary's career so far as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's my hobby away from racing, nearly, and he's kind of fulfilled what I always wanted to do when it came to football. But yeah, he's done very well. He started with Bray. He started with Bray, did well there. Went to Longford then. He was unfortunate. He had a couple of injuries because he was going well. He was playing with the Irish under-19 side with Robbie Brady and Jeff Hendrick and guys like that. And unfortunately, he had a couple of breaks of his leg, metatarsal first, then his ankle. Then he went to Longford, did very well there. Was Player of the Year there, and was actually Player of the Year of Rovers last season. But this season, unfortunately, he didn't get the game time. So he thought about moving on anyway, and it'll be a change. It'll be a change, but I think it'll be a good change. I'm not certain that the way Rovers played really suited him with the one man up front, and I think that might change at Pat. So I'm looking forward to it now, I have to say.
Good stuff. You've been great with your time, Sandy. Thanks very much for taking the call.
Okay, Jared. Thank you.
That's the senior Irish handicapper there. This is it's fascinating stuff when you get into it, because ultimately they've got to know how every horse in the country is going against every other horse in the country. It's a really difficult job.
Definitely, yeah. I guess a lot of people who really don't understand racing, handicaps are complete gobbledygook to them, but to my mind, I really enjoy looking at handicaps to find out. Back in the day, trainers would try to get their horse in the lowest possible mark to give him the best chance of winning when he gets into handicap company, and you'd have horses ludicrously well treated after 3 runs that literally were beating a car ride every race, couldn't even spot them, give them whatever the lowest mark, 75, and next thing they turn out to be much better. That's kind of changed. The Turf Club have come in and they're trying to take the skullduggery out of it. I think that the art of handicapping is still, even though it's slightly a dark art in ways for the trainer, he's still just trying to maximise the potential for his horse to win races, and we're all intrigued by that. How do you get your horse as best treated as possible? But I think it's a lot more transparent now, the process, and I think Noel O'Brien was critical in that, because he was not a guy who stayed at home behind a computer screen and looking at it. He went to the races and he knew the characters that would be trying to get one over him, and he talked to them, and he was like, I know what you're doing with that horse, and I'm on it, and I think he's inculcated that sort of system and beliefs with Sandy, and 2 absolute gentlemen, but two men who understand and really appreciate the game, and they're not these, like the referee who won't talk to you. He just gives you, that's the decision, and he's just got this air of haughty arrogance about him. They're not like that, and I think Sandy do a fine job, and so will his assistant.
Okay, we've talked a good bit about the racing at the weekend. We'll come back to that now in some more detail. A reminder that, of course, Friday Night Racing is brought to you with GoRacing.ie. Our bets, though, we need to talk about this, because our charity fund is now up to €1,305. We had 2 winners last week. Sanctus Simona and Down Royal, and Newspaper of Record, the Breeders' Cup. That's what we're going with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
That is indeed correct.
Yeah, because you had another tip that you'd also given out for Down Royal that happened before we went on air, technically.
Yeah, I think that might have been Sanctus Simona, but for the purposes of the record,
okay, all right.
Both horses run. The Newspaper of Record did it very well, and the Toast was obviously keen that we tip in the Breeders' Cup, because it goes into the pool over there, and that's how they bet, actually, essentially in America. They bet through the Toad pool, but she absolutely bolted off. She's 3 from 3. She looks very exciting.
Okay. So
we've plenty of options this weekend.
Yeah, we had 2 bets with the Toad.com last week for the Irish Injured Jockeys Fund. So all our winnings are obviously for charity for that. Keep an eye on the Toad.com or the Toad social media to see what the payout is going to be on your selections this weekend. Do you have selections for us this weekend?
Yeah, I'm going to give one selection that is in the 3:15. It's a race I actually mentioned with Sandy, because this horse, Wonder Late, is trained by Charles Burns, who's an absolute master of training these handicappers. And it says that at the bottom of the screen there, rated 119. Now, on the face of it, the rating he gave him for winning a maiden hurdle actually looks a little bit harsh, like a couple of pounds too high. But this horse then reverted back to the flat, and basically, as a rough guide, your flat mark should be about 40-45 pounds below your hurdles mark, just because they're 2 different disciplines, but they're working in, it's a bit like dollars versus euros, for example. But Wonder Lace's form in the flat, so his last run, he was 3rd, beaten a length of 93, which in theory would make him
130.
Yeah, 100. Even after that race, you could nearly say 135, 140. Yet he's run off 119, and he's very lightly raced, trained by a master. Davy Russell takes the ride, but the interesting thing about this race is it's going to be a fascinating betting race, because Angelo Javalex, who Gordon Elliot just basically improves horses from other yards time and time again, often exponentially, and this horse has been off for 686 days, but on the basis of his form earlier in his life, he could be very well handicapped if Gordon can untapped that potential that he had. And the bizarre thing is he's gone through the training rounds, but his last trainer was actually Charles Burns, and he trains Wonder Lace. So these are two horses who, like, as a layer in the betting ring, you're like, I'm really I'm on guard here, because one of these has to be very well backed. But I think Wonder Lace is the obvious one. He really should be winning this.
This is 3:15 at Naas tomorrow.
At Navan on Sunday.
At Navan on Sunday,
yeah.
Sorry, okay.
Two of my favourite tracks. Two very similar tracks. Both begin with NA, but they're both left-handed, and they're both very stiff finishes. And they're actually... A lot of people confuse one with the other in terms of past form, and I'm a bit like that myself. But I want to give a mention to a couple of mates on a stag tomorrow at Naas, and it's a great place to go racing, because they have a new owners and trainers facility, which is right over the finishing line. This kind of a circular structure that they brought in this year, and it's a cracking racetrack. And Navan on Sunday will attract a big crowd as well.
Yeah, great racing. So that's our tip this week. A win?
That is our tip, yeah. We'll go with the win on Wonder Lace.
Okay, now, I've been asking you for the last while to talk to us about some horses that you're going to keep an eye on between now and November, or between now and March, which was interesting. When Gordon was there, it was like, yeah, it's a long old campaign to March. He was saying, when you were asking about some other horses.
It's the narrative, it's still the narrative. Everything geared towards Cheltenham from a betting perspective. All those markets have been alive for a few months, and it's Cheltenham overall, really, in terms of what people remember in terms of your season, and Cheltenham still trumps everything else. Yeah, so Wonder Lace is a horse you think has a chance in... Yeah, he's an interesting horse. Now, he's one of three horses I might just put up with a view to looking at Cheltenham this week. He's rated 119. I could see him rocking up at the festival in something like the County Hurdle or maybe the Martin Pipe, because he will get a bit further, and he's a horse just to keep an eye on for one of those handicaps. Charles Burns has had success at Cheltenham. He won a World Hurdle back in the day with Solwit. What a cracking horse. Paul Carberry rode him. And he won with Weapons Amnesty as well in the RSA. He's a really good trainer, Charles. I think he's one of the trainers that I often wonder why he doesn't have more horses. He's not expensive either, but keep an eye on this horse. If he doesn't run at Leopardstown at Christmas, he may well run there, but he's a horse for Cheltenham, definitely Wonder Lace. I think he's only 6 years of age. Okay, Paloma Blue is another horse you want to talk about? Paloma Blue. He's trained by Henry de Bromhead, and he is a horse that was a very good novice hurdler last season. He ran very well behind Sam Crow at Leopardstown at the Dublin Race Festival, the inaugural renewal of that. And Henry de Bromhead's season has been excellent. We'll have Rachel Blackmore hopefully on at some stage, but herself, Gigginstown and Henry de Bromhead have built up a bit of a triumvirate of success really this year. They've had a great campaign, and if this horse takes to chasing, with Sam Crow not running in the Arkle, with Lorena seemingly not going down that route either, I think this horse is well worth a bet for the Arkle at around about 16-1. Paloma Blue. Okay. He can't run in any other race. If he's there, he runs in this race as far as I can see. Okay, so that's with Wonder Lace, you just hold on and you try and find somewhere that you can back. Just keep. He won't be in the market yet, but keep an eye on him for those handicap markets that'll come out in due course. Okay, and then Saldier, is that the right pronunciation? Saldier, yeah. So Saldier. As a League of Ireland journalist 1 minute and a racing journalist the next, this has been a big problem for me, because Kieran Sadlier is like a really good League of Ireland player. He'd be honoured in the PFAI Awards tomorrow night. Saldier, on the other hand, is a horse, juvenile hurdler trained by Willie Mullins, and I often call Kieran Saldier, and I call the horse Sadlier. So the L and the D does get me caught out, but I was down in Willie Mullins during the week. An amazing hospitality from him. Had a couple of guests in, and he couldn't have been nicer. He's in such good form at the moment. I can't but think his horses are in good nick, which they have been all season. But it's just he was in unbelievable good form. So I think. So you're looking at the body language of the trainer to see. He's happy, but it was actually funny. There was a girl riding a horse kind of that hasn't run for him. And so did a couple of canters anyway, whatever, and came in, and Willie says to everyone, how is he, how is she, and she goes, oh yeah, this is a machine. That horse shall remain unnamed until I reveal on the subsequent show, because I have to probably clear it with Willie as well. Actually, I'll just do it anyway, but I'm not going to reveal his name just yet. Okay. But he's a horse that hasn't run yet, and he's a 4-year-old next year. He'd probably end up in the Triumph Hurdle next March. If you can maybe reply to our Twitter feeds and see if you know the horse I'm talking about, I'd be very impressed now. But Willie chastised the girl playfully and said, shh, keep quiet, because there were a few people there that had nothing to do with the horse. Anyway, Saldier, on the other hand, he runs at Naas. You don't think it was a setup?
They were like, here, listen, we've got Johnny Ward coming in. You'll spot him, and there'll be somebody. Like, you just walk past and go, oh, this guy's a machine.
What? Willie told the story about he had this owner in, and I want to say the owner was from maybe the Arab world or somewhere in the east anyway, and he'd never visited the yard before, and his horse was actually working in front of him, and one of the guys who was on the horse, I think he might have been from Pakistan, but he was just new in the yard. And Willie was like, okay, I hope he doesn't say anything too derogatory about the horse. And he said, yeah, how did he go, like Kazim or whatever he was called? And Kazim was like, yeah, good. And then kind of goes off and he goes, but he's very, very slow. And Willie was like, oh God, the owner is here. So the owner was like, this lad's trying to pull a fast one on me. So Willie was like, this horse wasn't that long in the yard, and he was quite like he was slow to his mind, but like, the work rider probably was like jumping the gun here a bit. So the horse rocks up in a bumper shortly afterwards, absolutely bolts up. The owner wouldn't go because he thought like that, Willie was trying to plum awesome. And the horse ended up being well fancied for the Cheltenham bumper. He couldn't remember the name of it. But so when the owner is there, you kind of... you probably don't want the work rider to say the horse is useless or particularly slow.
Or amazing, because now all of a sudden the expectations are unbelievably high.
So
like,
the work rider...
I'm
happy with that. As Aidan O'Brien said, he was very happy with them. But Saldier is in great shape. I got that. Footpad's in great shape. He runs as well on Saturday at Naas. And if you're racing at the weekend, you're spoiled for choice, really. You've Navan or Naas, the National Hunt Aficionados. It probably depends on what race meeting is more convenient for you. I'd strongly advise both. To see the gorgeous Footpad in the flesh, one of the best jumpers I've ever seen. But Saldier, Ruby Walsh rides him for I think the first time in the hurdle race at Naas. But I'd have a few bob on him to win the champion hurdle. I know he's 5 and they have a terrible record in the race as a 5-year-old next year, but I think he's very exciting.
Okay, so Saldier for the champion hurdle.
Not Sadlier.
Paloma Blue in the Arkle and Wonderleish for one of the handicaps.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's...
we make this a little feature of the show going forward that we
check in and see how they're getting on.
And talk about a different Cheltenham horse or two every week to give a mention to, including the as yet unnamed machine from Willie Mullen's yard. Yeah,
because no one should be... you can stick €1 each way in some of these that are like...
It could be 33-1. Like Saldier is 33-1, I think, at the moment for the champion hurdle. Again, I don't really see him running any other race. That market's just moved now, you've put him up. Yeah, well, such is the power of off the ball, but you might be taking
you're
on
being humble. It's the power of Johnny Ward. We all know that. Is there any of these other races that you want to talk about specifically that we haven't yet? Because there's like a brilliant field on a couple of these races, and I'm just looking back at some of the former winners, and you're like, okay.
You did mention that. I think that was probably
Big Zeb, Flemingstone. Yeah.
So
the Tote.com Fortria.
The Fortria at Navan.
Moscow Flyer, Al Capone. Native Upmanship.
Some great names. Native Upmanship would have been racing around about the time I got into racing, which was the early 2000s, and he was very unlucky, Native Upmanship, because he wasn't a 2-miler, but he didn't stay the Gold Cup trip. So basically, at that time, there was no Ryanair chase. So your championship race at Cheltenham were either over 2 miles or 3 miles, 2 furlongs and a half. So he frequently chased home the backside of Moscow Flyer. He wasn't good enough to beat Moscow Flyer over 2 miles, and he probably wasn't good enough to beat him over 2.5 when they ran at Aintree. But if the Ryanair had been around, he could have farmed that race. And I remember saying that to Arthur Moore a few years ago, and he was just like, it is what it is, but he would have been totally suited. He's a lovely horse owned by John Magner, and I'm fond memories of him. But Native Upmanship won the 4-3, Moscow Flyer, Central House, nickname Big Zeb, Fleming Star, Clarkham won it last year. Obviously went on to win the Galway Place. It's a proper race, and Ballyosheen probably be odds on Sunday. I would expect him to take the beating for Inda Bulger and Barry Geraghty, but it's a good renewal of the race again. Yeah, there are so many horses now that you're starting to recognise the names. It's great that they're all come back. Like Mellon could be taking on Sam Crow later on this month in the Morgiana. Footpad coming back, and Apple Jade as well. She was quite costly to follow at the end of last season, but in fairness to her on her day, she won this race last year. She's a brilliant mare, and Gordon is obviously very pleased with her. That's the other grade too. I mentioned Felix Desgy. This is a kind of this is the 105 for auction I was hurdle at Navan. Felix Desgy is a very interesting horse because he was just too much of a head the ball really last season to really achieve his potential. It was kind of like... I wish we'd known that at the time. Yeah, I backed him at Cheltenham. Unfortunately, did you back him as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Felix Desjy bandwagon. Obviously, a little bit of word got out from the yard that he was going well because he's a load of ability. I know Keith Donoghue, who rides horses. He was at a preview night apparently, and he says this horse could be really nearly anything. And I thought at Galway he turned the corner. He just looked like the break and hurdles had made a bit of a man out of him. And I think he'll win on Sunday. He'll be one of my best bets. He's taken on Quick Grab, him, very good horse of Willie Mullins, but he's getting £7 off him, and that should be enough.
I see Brian Cooper's on Ordinary World in the Fortria as well.
The boy Cooper's career has gone through the roof since he appeared on this show. But more to the point, he just does seem to be riding Chris Jones's horses. And Chris Jones has a couple of good runners at the weekend and a couple of nice horses. He did a juvenile hurdler win under Brian at Down Royal at the weekend. And Chris has actually off the record kind of said that there's no retained rider arrangement, but at least on paper, Brian seems to be riding all his horses.
Been on the record now.
Yeah, well, anyway, what he said off the record was basically that there wasn't a story.
So then it wasn't off the record.
So it's on the record because there was no story.
Okay.
Chris is a great kind of patron of racing, but regardless of what Chris said, Brian Cooper seems to be riding a lot of his horses, and this is a big bit of news for Brian. If he's riding them or not longer term, who knows? But it's a major fill-up for him, and he had a big ride. He had a big ride for Jigginstown in the JNY in a Grade 1 at the last Saturday, like a 9-2 shot. Who was admittedly disappointing, but Brian's career ever since he appeared, we could be kind of like you're in the doldrums. Come on this show, and we'll help you along.
Last chance, you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we'll give you the boost that your career needs,
that's why Gordon Elliot did it today, and Donegal O'Brien had a couple of weeks ago.
I don't think they need any help, but there are some out there who do, and Brian Cooper did reckon that it did him no harm at all coming on this show, so it's open to other people to do likewise.
There you go, Johnny. Good stuff. Enjoy the weekend's racing.
Enjoy the weekend. Back from Lisbon.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. Well, you know it all too well.
Loved it. I was only there for a couple of days. Loved it. Thought it was a really fascinating city.
Yeah. Good racing this weekend. Stay tuned to all of our platforms. We'll keep up to date on how those results are going. We'll obviously be back here next week. Same bad channel, same bad time. Until then, good luck.
Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
And they're off. Brought to you by Go Racing. Plan your day at the races at goracing.ie.